Did you know that Kain is unable to hit a unit standing in the bottom right corner? For some reason, Kain's ability is unable to damage a unit standing in this spot. He literally has to spin to win. Also, the next time you open a game with the Augment Longshot, don't miss out on running as many 1-star snipers like Caitlyn or Kog'Maw against PvE rounds. This will help you to fulfill the condition faster to receive your sniper's focus. Here are 11 more interactions from set 11 you didn't know about. But before we get started, only a small percent of my viewers are subscribed, which means I will have to send this trio of untargetable Xayahs to hunt them down.
Oh.
Let's kick things off with the Portal Champion Conference. This portal is infamous for not giving you the champion you want, so it is important to understand how you need to play around this mechanic. At the start of every stage, the game checks your trait list and grants you a unit based on the trait with the highest number of units on your board. If your two highest traits have the same amount of units, then it's down to a 50-50 chance. You get a tier 2 unit in stage 2, and it increases by 1 tier with every stage, capping out at tier 5. There is one very useful trick you can use to manipulate the outcome in stage 2-1. Sometimes you want a very specific unit, maybe because it fits with your augment choice. The trick here is simply to change up your board before you make your augment selection. For example, if you have a Kobuku and a Tristana from a loot orb, you can place only these two on your board and guarantee yourself a free Teemo to activate Fortune right away. In late game, you should keep in mind that not every trait has a tier 5 unit, and even if they do, sometimes they have a special condition. For example, if you're looking for Xayah Rakan, then you need to make sure that Dragonlord is your highest trait. It's not possible to tailor for them by using Altruist or Trickshot, and the game will simply give you something else. Speaking of Trickshot, this trait is quite misleading. The description states that each Ricochet deals a percentage of the previous bounce's damage, but how much of this is actually true? In this example, I have a Sivir with an Infinity Edge and 100% critical strike chance. She is up against a Darius 2-star and a Kobuku 1-star in the front line and an enemy Sivir in the back line. Darius has 40 armor and Kobuku has 30 armor, so we can expect Darius to take less damage. After her ult, she deals 190 damage to Darius and 92 damage to Sivir in the back line. She then swaps to Kobuku and now deals 204 damage, but the bounce is still only 92 damage in the back line. This means that the Ricochet is based around pre-mitigation damage to make sure that the damage isn't reduced twice by armor values. The same applies for critical strikes. You can't double dip critical damage because the Ricochet doesn't take the initial critical strike damage into account. Since we're already on the topic of critical strike damage, let's take a look at Qiyana. Her ability states that her attacks deal bonus physical damage to her main target and a lower amount to targets behind them. Similar to Sivir, she is one of the very few units in set 11 that doesn't require spell crit at all. All of her attacks, even during her ability, are able to critically strike without an Infinity Edge. Does this mean Infinity Edge is a bad item on her? Not exactly. Even though she doesn't need spell crit, Infinity Edge still grants her the additional 10% critical strike damage because the condition for the item is being met. At the end of the day, it's up to you if you feel like the item is worth building on her. Honestly, I'm not sure why the description states that she deals bonus physical damage. It makes it sound like she gets a bunch of bonus damage on top of her base AD, which is not the case. The damage showcased in her ability is her total damage. One game mechanic that I feel is still very underplayed is pathing manipulation. Understanding the ins and outs on how units behave can give you an advantage if your opponent has poor positioning. For example, most players will position Annie in the front line so she stuns and applies the burn to the enemy tanks, but in this setup, the enemy backline is perfectly safe. If you have a setup with too many melee units, you can position units like Annie in a way that makes her path into the enemy third row and sometimes even into the enemy corner. If Annie makes it into the enemy third row, she can hit way more units and also heal herself for a much more significant amount. This strategy works great in combination with the Augment Stationary support or with the Portal Wandering Sentinels. If your target dummy rolled a Zizirod, you now have 2 additional frontline units at your disposal that you can use to manipulate the pathing of your units. If you feel like this is too complicated, you can also just spam a bunch of Zizirods with Fine Vintage. They will find their way to the enemy carry one way or another. There are also a lot of smaller plays you can aim for. For example, if you select the augment March of Progress in stage 2-1, you should immediately look for any exalted units. March of Progress grants bonus XP based on your level, but the progression isn't always smooth. Sometimes running exalted even for a single round can result in a small snowball effect that results in you reaching level 8 faster. It also doesn't hurt being able to field an extra unit for a few additional rounds to stay more healthy in the mid game. There's also another small trick players like to use that is based around Ornn items. Not the artifacts, but the temporary items he grants to the closest ally after every cast. These items are tailored to the unit type and are therefore extremely useful. One way to guarantee that the correct item goes on the correct unit is to isolate Ornn and have them stand next to each other. But there is another trick you can use to solve this problem. If you put a Thief's Gloves on a unit next to Ornn, then this unit becomes an invalid target because all of the item slots are already filled up. Now it's much easier to place him next to units like Set and still manipulate the target who gets the first item. While Ornn sadly doesn't print any artifacts anymore, the augment Trash to Treasure takes care of that for us and is arguably one of the best additions to TFT in a very long time. In previous videos I already talked about how you can reforge bad artifacts and manipulate emblems, but there is one secret interaction that might get fixed in the near future. For some reason you can reforge a Tactician's Crown into a new artifact and you don't lose the increased team size. This is a neat little trick, and in most games you won't get punished for this unless you end up finding a second Tactician's Crown, maybe from a fortune cash out. All the way back in set 4 I tinkered with destroying items, and I already learned back then that the team size doesn't decrease after destroying a Fawn. However, once I received a second Fawn, I realized that my team size didn't increase, so I was effectively down 1 unit. I would not be surprised if the same rule set applies with the Reforger, but since this is an edge case, it's probably nothing to worry about. A trap that is much easier to fall into has to do with encounters. Be careful if you find yourself in a game where all the augments get shuffled around by Lilia. There are some augments that have a negative synergy if they are picked late. For example, Stimpack will not account for any HP you've lost before you've taken the augment. Other augments like Caretaker's Ally, Favor or Chosen have similar issues. You don't receive the rewards retroactively, and you should never consider taking any of these in the Zoe encounter that only allows for odd levels. Another augment worth talking about that has a lot of misinformation is Dragon Spirit. It grants you a Dragon's Claw, and for every 8000 healing you receive a bonus component up to a maximum of 4. I heard a lot of stories about the augment taking other healing sources into consideration to farm the components faster, but I was never able to confirm any of that. If you check the healing stats, then you will notice healing from Dragon's Claw isn't even listed in the combat log. Healing from abilities like Kobuku or Amumu or any type of Omnivamp definitely doesn't count towards healing for the augment. If you were able to confirm another source of healing besides Dragon's Claw, let me know in the comments. In the past there was a lot of discussion around the topic of leaving orbs on the ground. The idea was to pull less units out of the pool and to have more slots available on your unit bench. Nowadays there are barely any mechanics with guaranteed unit orbs. There are some fortune cash outs with specific units, but for the most part this mechanic is reduced to the augment Missed Connections. This augment grants you every tier 1 unit and the units will always appear in the same position. This can be useful in tier 1 reroll, usually based around Kog'Maw, so you can keep units like Caitlyn, Cho'Gath, Malphite or Kog'Maw on the ground while you're slow rolling. In theory, there's also the augment Dynamic Duo, where you can collect a small orb first, and therefore you can tell which legendary unit is waiting for you in the gold orb. You can keep this orb on the ground before rolling to slightly increase your chance for a 2-star legendary. For the final clip, I want to highlight Soraka. She has a very unique passive that grants her AP based on the total HP that your team lost so far. The cool part about this ability is that it's not static, so you don't max out on 40 AP when your team dies. This can make her surprisingly powerful in combination with augments like Well-Fed in a bruiser setup that grants your entire team massive healing, and you also get a free altruist trait thanks to Riven. She can definitely reach some impressive AP numbers, and if you position her in the second row, you can also reach some of the backline clumps so she doesn't always cast into the enemy frontline. This more or less covers everything I wanted to showcase. What was your favorite hidden interaction so far? Let me know in the comments. I hope you learned something, and see you next time. Oh god, that's a lot. That's like 3 duplicators in total. I don't even, like, I don't think the... Oh, okay, yeah. That's the reason why... Do we even get to see Zaya 3? That's the reason why I almost lost to Crab Brave with Rakan 3-star.